Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Making Sense of the New Blanket Mechanical License and the Mechanical Licensing Collective. I'm Gwen Seal, board member of Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts. TALA provides pro bono legal and accounting assistance for artists and arts nonprofits in the state of Texas. Currently, TALA is waiving fees in connection with requests related to the pandemic. You must be a Texas resident to qualify for these services, and you can find out more about TALA at talaarts.org. TALA would like to thank our supporters, the City of Austin Cultural Arts Division, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Texas Commission on the Arts. We greatly appreciate all that these organizations have done for us, especially in the midst of this devastating pandemic. We also want to give special thanks to our partners for this webinar, the Austin Music Foundation and Austin, Texas musicians. Thank you all so much for your hard work marketing and promoting this event. Now let me introduce y'all, without further ado, to today's panelists. We first have Chris Castle here. Chris Castle founded his firm, Christian L. Castle's Attorneys, in 2005, and he works on a variety of transactional matters related to music, technology, and policy. We also have with us Abby North. Abby North is principal of North Music Group, LLC, and a founder of Unchained Melody Publishing, LLC. She has vast experience in works registration, a strong knowledge of music publishing data and databases, and a background developing royalty processing and common works registration CWR software tools. I am also a lawyer here in Austin who practices at Mike Tollison and Associates. You can find out more about us and our full bios on the Eventbrite link for today's webinar. So let's get started here. Share my screen. So in order to fully understand this new blanket mechanical license and the Mechanical Licensing Collective, it's really important to have a basic grasp on some copyright law principles. So as it relates to music, there are two distinct copyrights. There's the musical composition, which is also referred to as the song. The musical composition consists of the lyrics and the melody. So let's say I write down some lyrics and I write a corresponding melody. At the point at which this particular music, being the melody and these lyrics, are fixed in a tangible medium, so like on a piece of paper, I have a musical composition. I have a song. This is one of these copyrights. So I wrote these lyrics in this melody. Thus, I am the songwriter. I am also the music publisher. My job as the music publisher is to go out and exploit this particular musical composition. I will be the music publisher unless I have an agreement in writing stating otherwise. So it could be that I decide that, you know what, I want to engage Abby, a music publisher, to do my publishing work for me. At that point, Abby is the publisher and I am still the songwriter. Note that the sound recording, also referred to as the master, is a separate copyright. For the purpose of today's presentation, we are really only dealing with the musical composition. So now that we have established this distinction, let's talk about mechanical rights, because after all, we're talking about this new blanket mechanical license and the Mechanical Licensing Collective. So this invokes the mechanical right. As a copyright owner, you are afforded a bundle of rights. One of these rights is the right to reproduce your work, your copyright, in copies. So this is where the mechanical right comes into play. The mechanical right is the right to reproduce and distribute a musical composition embodied in a sound recording in an audio-only format via, for example, physical product or interactive streaming or downloads. Note that a mechanical license must be obtained to lawfully reproduce and distribute musical compositions. And in exchange, mechanical royalties are owed to parties or a party that controls a particular musical composition. And these royalties are paid out through your music publisher, publishing administrator, or publishing aggregator if you've engaged one of those, or a collection agency like the Harry Fox Agency or Music Reports, or now this newly established Mechanical Licensing Collective. Now, it's important that we don't confuse mechanical rights with public performance rights. In this bundle of rights that you are afforded as a copyright owner, one of these rights in this bundle is the right to perform your work publicly. So the public performance right is the right to perform a musical composition embodied in a sound recording publicly. A public performance of music could be playing this particular song live, or maybe it's played on the radio, or on TV, or in venues, or on the internet. In exchange, performance royalties are owed to songwriters and music publishers for these uses, for this public performance of music. And these monies are paid out via performing rights organizations, shortened PROs. And so PROs are ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and GMR. And if you're a songwriter watching this, I imagine that you are affiliated with one of these performing rights organizations and receive performance royalties as songwriters, or maybe also too as publishers. So I think it's important to kind of clarify some of the payout differences between performance royalties and mechanical royalties. So Abby, would you mind explaining to the audience here what the payout difference is between these two revenue streams pertaining to songs?
So on the performance royalty side, there's typically a separation. There's sort of a bifurcation. There's a songwriter share and a publisher share of the performance, and those are typically equal. So your PRO, let's say it's ASCAP, with ASCAP, to be able to receive that publisher share of performance royalties, you actually have to have a publisher entity. ASCAP will not pay the publisher share of performance royalties to a writer affiliation. At BMI, however, they will. So you can affiliate at BMI solely as a writer and collect both the writer and the publisher share of performance royalties. So the performance royalties, the performance right is licensed by those PROs you mentioned, and then those PROs collect the money from those entities they licensed to, and then they distribute that money to the writers and the publishers. On the mechanical side, the mechanical historically is paid to the copyright owner or controller. So that's usually the publisher. There isn't typically a writer member, say, of a mechanical society. So that's why when Gwen was saying, if you own your copyright, you're a publisher. And that's the shift that I think that writers really have to embrace, is that now with mechanicals, if you own your songs, you're a publisher. So with the MLC, with Harry Fox, with music reports, you as a publisher will register the works that you own and control, and those entities will then distribute mechanical royalties to you. Harry Fox has some exceptions, and MRI, where they have historically administered, and so in some cases writers do directly receive, but typically it's a publisher who receives mechanical royalties. And then also typically in our publishing agreements with writers or our administration agreements with other publishers, it's established that we, the publisher or administrator, will collect that mechanical royalty and then pass a percentage of it through to the writer.
Thank you. And, Abby, we were talking about this on the phone, I guess it was on Tuesday, where there's a lot of confusion that arises because you have different terms that are used interchangeably that refer to the same thing, right? And that's why I want to bring up the MLC's term, self-administered songwriter. People are going to hear this term throughout the rest of this presentation, so I just wanted to make sure that this term is defined. So would you mind explaining this to the audience?
So I think we have to go back to that concept of, if you own your copyrights as the songwriter, you're also a publisher. In that publisher role, if you directly affiliate, let's say, with a PRO, and then that PRO pays performance royalties, the publisher share of performance royalties to you, you are self-administered, meaning you as the publisher are doing the works registration yourself, you're collecting the money yourself. That would be self-administered. And the opposite, meaning if you're not self-administered, would mean that you had done, let's say, either an administration deal with a publisher or you'd done a publishing deal with a publisher, in which case that administrator or publisher would be the one to register your works, license them, collect the money, and then distribute to you.
Great. So, Chris, we're going to shift over to you to talk about the Music Modernization Act and this new blanket license and this mechanical licensing collective. So, would you mind giving the audience a background of how we got here? And can you summarize the three parts of the Music Modernization Act and how it kind of fits in with this presentation?
Right. Well, I usually refer to it actually as the 3.5 parts of the Music Modernization Act. So to go with the three, it's basically Title I, which is was called the Music Modernization Act, which deals with mechanicals, and that's really what we're going to be talking about today. The other two parts are the Classics Act, which deals with pre-72 sound recordings and bringing them into or quieting a question that had come up through some knucklehead lawyers for Sirius and Pandora. Actually, it was one knucklehead lawyer for both Sirius and Pandora who decided that a really good plan would be to stop paying pre-72 recordings, the artist share of pre-72 recordings to people like Smokey Robinson, people like that. So that went down real well, so they brought this Classics Act, and that was kind of floating out there. And then the third part is called the AMP Act, and that dealt with getting producers paid on really sort of in line with Sound Exchange policy on webcasting royalties, where they will accept a letter of direction. And there's some situations it deals with on the older masters, like pre-95, and the reason they chose 95 is because that was when we first got a limited performance right for sound recordings and digital transmissions. So we're not going to talk about those last two, but you may ask yourself, what do these three things have in common? The answer, of course, is nothing, right? But what they were trying to do was trying to sort of bring together the lobbying power of the entire industry, right, behind each of these bills, because they felt that they would stand a better chance of getting them all passed if they just pushed them into an omnibus. And the half is Title 1.5, which deals with some tweaks to the ASCAP and BMI consent decrees, which are too technical to go into right now, but nothing major, nothing that really has a direct effect on your income. But Title I set up this entire blanket license and was really in response to class actions brought by independent songwriters like David Lowery and Melissa Ferrick, who sued Spotify for failing to license their works or pay royalties. And there were people who characterized those lawsuits as gotchas, but I can go into all the reasons why they were not gotchas, which mostly had to do with the fact that Spotify ignored multiple requests to get right with God and license and pay on those songs, which they didn't do. So Spotify was about to go public, and they wanted to quiet down the litigation front. So that was partly their incentive for supporting the Music Modernization Act, because it did, in that case, it does take two to tango, because it deals with both the songwriters and publishers as well as the music services. And there was this, kumbaya moment, which I think we are going to find was not so kum and mostly on the ya, right? In the case of the Mechanical Licensing Collective. But that's where that's the authority for the Mechanical Licensing Collective is in Title I.
And can you explain how this new blanket license system differs than what we had in place before?
Right. So what we had in place before, simply put, is song by song licensing. So if you're someone who has received these voluminous notice of intent to use papers from MRI, or what we used to call it carpet bombing NOIs, right? Because they would send out literally millions of these things, and that was also how some of the services missed stuff. The problem wasn't that they missed it. See, people have been missing NOIs since 1909 when they first were established for piano rolls, but the problem that they have is that they didn't fix it when they had a chance, right? So in the old system, if you didn't get your notice out, 30 days after you started using the work, then you basically were precluded, from getting a license, which meant you had to go get a voluntary license from the copyright owner, which is why you'll see in some of these HFA and MRI notices that they've been clearly backdated. Lowry, in fact, got a backdated NOI after he filed his class action lawsuit. Got a backdated NOI from HFA that was from an address that HFA didn't have until 4 years after the date of the NOI, and signed by someone who hadn't worked at Spotify in 2 years. So this desperate measures were taken very often. And so they said, let's just have a blanket so that we don't ever get in that situation again. And if you're the services, that's something that you'd want. If you're a songwriter, you'll want it if it results in you getting paid at least as well as you were before under the song by song system, as opposed to the blanket system. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that.
And so what is the role of this newly established mechanical licensing collective going forward, Chris?
Well, so someone has to administer this blanket license, right? Mm-hmm. Now, it's important to understand that if you have existing licenses, NOIs, compulsory licenses, where you're getting paid, those all go away. And now they get transferred over, supposedly, in what I'm sure will be an absolutely seamless process to the Mechanical Licensing Collective. So they're supposed to basically administer all mechanical rights for every song ever written or that ever may be written that's exploited in the United States. And I guess you could add to that that's still in copyright. So that's a lot of songs.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to receive a notice from a user. And there's a couple of different categories of users, but let's just stay with the major kind of people, which would be Spotify, Apple, those kind of folks. And then those services are supposed to pay over on a monthly basis with a 45-day lag the royalties, along with a usage report for all those different streams. So just pause on that for a moment. That's probably going to be billions of lines of code every month, right? And because they're not doing it just for one service, right? They're doing it for the entire industry. So that will definitely be into the billions, if not the trillions, of lines of code in the usage reports, right? Monthly. And then they're supposed to pay out royalties, because basically what will happen is, instead of the service sending out a bunch of individual checks and a bunch of individual royalty statements for the pure statutory licenses, as opposed to voluntary licenses, right? Which would be like a catalog, like a Sony ATV or a Universal does a deal with Spotify. They're going to have a voluntary license, and they're going to get paid outside of the MLC. So the only people who are really going to be getting paid through the MLC are the people who don't have those voluntary licenses. And then the service will send the usage report, and they'll send one check, right? And then the MLC is going to take all that information and break it down and they will send out. Well, they're probably not going to send out checks. They'll probably send out. They'll probably make it available to you on a portal with some kind of electronic funds transfer, right? But
Yeah.
that's basically what they're supposed to do. Bearing in mind that one of the big differences between the song by song system and this system is that the services are paying the salaries and the operating costs of the MLC. So the MLC basically works for the services and is beholden to the services to the tune of, something like, I think it's the initial payment is something like $35 million, and then it's a $25 million a year or something like that. So it's millions of dollars that they're going to get paid by the services. Not quite clear what costs so much money, but they're basically on the payroll of the services for the foreseeable future. And that's another big difference between the way it was before and the way it is now, bearing in mind that this was sold on the idea that the services will pay all the administrative costs, but yet if you're going through the Harry Fox agency, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, or you're going through some other administrator, that person probably is still going to be taking their commission on your revenue. So I don't know what it means to say that the MLC is paid for by the services and that's a benefit to songwriters, because I don't think it's going to be an appreciable difference. It might if you're a self-administered person, but then all you're going to be doing, if you don't have anybody who you pay at all, then you didn't have anybody before either. So I don't know how you benefit from that, but that's the general idea.
Next, I'm going to pose to you what I like to think of as the $64,000 question, being what is the relationship between the Harry Fox agency and this newly established mechanical licensing collective?
Right. Well, let's remember that the Harry Fox agency was owned by the National Music Publishers Association, right? The biggest proponent of the MMA and the MLC was the National Music Publishers Association. And the way this worked was the Copyright Office was supposed to designate the organization, the nonprofit corporation that was going to run the lowercase mechanical licensing collective. So it's confusing a bit because in the statute establishes a thing that's called the mechanical licensing collective. And then when the NMPA was auditioning to be the mechanical licensing collective, they created an organization that they called VMLC Inc., right? So when you speak of the MLC, you have to be sure you're talking about, or you have to be sure about what you're talking about, right? Are you talking about the concept in the statute of an MLC, or are you talking about the MLC Inc., right? So after the MLC Inc., so there was this beauty pageant of two, right, where people were auditioning to be the MLC, and Jeff Price had one group, and NMPA had another group, which was the MLC Inc. And when you read the definition of what it takes to be the MLC, to be designated as the MLC, you won't be surprised to find out that the people who drafted it so that it sure sounded an awful lot like them, right? So surprise, surprise, they were designated as the MLC, right? The MLC Inc. became the MLC. Now, after the fact, supposedly, although I'm not so sure I believe this, but after the fact, the MLC was supposed to select vendors, right? And there's actually reason to believe that this was not entirely on the up and up. But some months after, like they were designated in July, and then they announced in Thanksgiving Day or Wednesday before Thanksgiving that they had selected the Harry Fox Agency to be their vendor. Because the Harry Fox Agency was best of breed, and all these different superlatives that got attached to the HFA. Now, anybody who's ever actually dealt with HFA would find that very questionable thinking, right? Because the gaps are notorious. And I would just point out that HFA was the licensing agent for Spotify. That would be the Spotify that was sued in 2 separate class actions and about 8 copyright infringement lawsuits, all for the same thing, which was failing to license properly. And the Harry Fox Agency most recently was named as a defendant, finally, in the Eminem case against Spotify, right? So anyway, they picked HFA, and HFA is now the data vendor for the MLC, which is fine. I mean, it's not like they can't do anything. I mean, they're not incompetent, but they're just not. To me, I would have preferred to just start from scratch, because HFA is a really old organization. I mean, I don't know if they're 100 years old yet, but they're close. And, I would not be shocked if there are pieces of the HFA database that still run on FoxPro, or Excel spreadsheets and stuff. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just, it's not this, I mean, this is the 21st century. Surely we can be better than that. But in any event, that's what we have. And the way it looks now, there weren't very many tasks that the Congress laid on the MLC. But one of them was to create what they call the Musical Works Database. And it was all these reasons that you would think of, which is, well, the industry has suffered because there's no place to go look up, who owns what. And, it's not really the service's fault that they didn't know, because it's the industry's fault that they didn't have this way to look things up, right? So we're going to make the MLC create this Musical Works database. Well, when you go to the current Musical Works database at the MLC, what they call, and you can do this, there's a public lookup, you will find that it's basically the HFA database. So it's not like it's not like they took a copy of the HFA database and put it into a new database. It is the HFA database. And when you're checking and you're doing what they call the data quality initiative, where you go confirm, what's good and what's bad in the database, you're supposedly looking at the MLC database, but what you're really doing is you're looking at the HFA database, and you're making improvements in the HFA database, which is owned by HFA, because there is no MLC database as far as I can tell. Now, that doesn't mean there never will be one, but as far as I know, it doesn't exist. So right now, right off the bat, they haven't complied with their one of their most fundamental statutory obligations. So that's really the connection. And I think that basically what's going to happen is they're going to kind of limp along using the HFA database as their database for the foreseeable future. And we may find that they never create an independent Musical Works database.
If it's okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't want to derail. I just want to make, since we're talking to songwriters and their representatives, it's really, really important that you look at that publicly accessible database now and review all of your works. Search for your works. Look at the data that's there. Make sure it's correct, because there's probably going to be a lot of stuff in there that isn't correct. And the only way anybody will know is if the writers who are intimate with these works identify the data disparities. Sorry, Chris, I didn't mean to.
No, that's okay. I was just winding up, but that was where I was going. It's like, you can go look this up. They have if you go to the HFA or the you go to the MLC.com, Freudian slip. If you go to the MLC.com, up in the right-hand corner, you'll see a public search button, and you can go there. You don't have to sign up for anything. You can just go there and look up, search for yourself, and see what they have. They may not, if you've never affiliated with HFA, I'd say there's a 50-50 chance that you're not in there, even if you have been getting paid under statutory mechanical licenses. So does that,
Abby, I feel like
I think that's a good place to stop.
thanks for that information, Chris. Abby, I feel like you kind of gave us a great segue into our next portion. And you were talking about the importance of looking in the public database and just seeing, if your works are in there and just making sure that everything, looks correct. And so, a question I have for you is, let's say a songwriter has engaged a publisher or a publishing administrator or an aggregator that does this kind of work. Is the songwriter just good to go with respect to the MLC? Or should the songwriter also, go and be proactive and look in this database?
Okay, so the songwriter is theoretically good to go in terms of the, let's say, licensing and collections if they have an administrator or publisher. Meaning a songwriter can't go into the MLC and be like, hey, I got a publisher, but I want you MLC to just pay me. That's not going to happen. But coming back to my point, songwriters know their songs. Songwriters know who wrote the song. They know who, what the shares are. They know what the names are and how they're supposed to be spelled. Most publishers, and particularly, let's say, aggregators, they have no relationship at all with the songs, none. So it is absolutely imperative that songwriters go into this public portal and review all of their work, review your works, look to see, first of all, are you there? Secondly, are your co-writers there? Thirdly, are the associated songwriters, the recordings, are the associated recordings, are they correct? Are they comprehensive? I'm actually not sure now. I think that the IPIs of the creators are currently in the public database. Make sure that the IPIs are correct to the extent.
What are IPI? What are
right?
The
IPIs, right? So the interested party identifier is the IPI, and there's an IPI name number. And there's an IPI base number. And for all intents and purposes, we're going to ignore the base number because it's almost never publicly accessible. The IPI name number is sort of like your tax ID. It's an identifier that's globally associated with you. The thing to keep in mind is that if you have name permutations, like, for example, I'm Abby North, I'm also Abigail North, I'm my maiden name, etc. Each one of those versions of my name has a different IPI name number. So it's important to know that you may very well, you likely, have multiple IPI name numbers. But you want to make sure that, and by the way, those IPI name numbers, they point to you as sort of a legal entity. So the legal entity is that which is being paid typically. So all of these IPI name numbers, we need to make sure that they're associated actually with you and your tax ID. So that's something, if you see an IPI name number that's associated with one of your songs, but you haven't received royalties, it's a good idea to make sure that each of your IPIs is in fact linked to you. But coming back to, are you good to go? So you have to, one of the things that I'm seeing so far is if I look in my personal portal, I see the works as I've registered them. So sort of correct. But when I look at the same works in the public portal, that is not the case. There's a whole bunch of data in there that I didn't deliver and that is not accurate. And if there's inaccurate data, meaning the wrong writer, the wrong publisher, in that database, there's a very good chance that somebody else is receiving my money. So as a songwriter, somebody else could be receiving your money if you don't go in there and make sure that the data related to your songs is correct. Now, if you're a songwriter and you have an administrator or a publisher and you find something wrong, you then have to go to your administrator or publisher, inform them, give them as much information as possible, and then they will be the ones to have to correct the data within that database.
Okay, so let's say a songwriter has not contracted with a publisher or an administrator. How does that songwriter, who I guess would be referred to as a self-administered songwriter, get her works into this register the works with MLC?
So my understanding is this, and I don't, because I'm a publisher,
Mm-hmm.
I deliver my works registration a certain way, which will be different from the average, let's say, songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is what happens is you will join the MLC. You will then have access to a portal. And then from within that portal, you will be able to add your songs. I suspect you'll only be able, well, I don't know for sure. You may only be able to add the information related to the percentages that you control. I'm not actually 100% if you will be able, I'm not 100% sure that you'll be able to deliver 100% of the shares. I don't know that. So that would be good information. But let's say let's say you might be able to deliver the comprehensive shares, like you and all your co-writers.
One thing I do want to mention, it's on a later slide. Each individual co-writer would need to affiliate with the MLC and then register her respective shares.
Yes. So mechanical works registration typically functions a little bit different than the performance side.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, when we register our work at a PRO, we have to give the whole thing. We can't, like, a registration of a work wouldn't even be accepted if it didn't include 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But typically, mechanical societies, or not typically, but often, and particularly in the US, they do generally have the rights holder solely provide data related to its own share. I don't, like I said, I'm not sure if a writer that's self-administered, I'm not sure if you can deliver 100%. But what happens, whether you do or you do not, is that your co-writers' shares, in general, will be confirmed. They will be verified by that society before money is distributed to those parties. So anyway, the answer to the question is go into your portal, register your works to the extent that you can right now. I'm not entirely sure what the functionality is today at the MLC.
And so probably a question that a lot of people have, when can publishers and self-administered songwriters expect to receive royalty statements from the MLC?
Well, I actually did a blog post about this today, which, if you can see the chat, I put in the chat. It's the musictechpolicy.com link. And the short answer is we don't know for sure, but probably sometime after April 15th. And the way I got to that date is there is a lot of detail and specific reporting requirements for the music services in the Copyright Act and the regulations, but there's very little detail about when, relative to that, about when the MLC is required to pay out royalties. But generally, the MLC is supposed to pay monthly, but there's a big difference between, paying monthly and being obligated to pay monthly and getting it out as of a certain date. Because if they don't specify the date and they just say monthly, and they, you don't have any way of knowing when they're late, right? So the way it works, but you do on the service side. So the services are supposed to pay 45 days after the end of the calendar month. So the January will be the first calendar month that the services are going to be paying the MLC. So they will pay the MLC around March 15th, 17th, March 17th. Actually.
Is it March 15th or February 15th?
It's 45 days after the month, right?
Right.
So
after the month end?
After the month end, yeah.
Okay, so March 15th.
Yeah, but the February 15th is a different date. That's the black box exception.
YouTube reports, yeah.
But the regular royalties will be paid over March 17th, by March 17th, and then the MLC is supposed to pay it out in April. So what that means is if you've been getting a monthly check, and there will be some people who have had a pure statutory license up to this point, your payment for December will be the last payment you get directly from the service. And you will go into a hiatus period where you don't get any payments at all until April, sometime in April, hopefully. Let's say it's April 15th. I mean, that I've talked to board members at the MLC and they say, oh, April 15th. I'm like, okay, all right, we'll see. Then after that, you get paid monthly. So if you've been getting paid monthly, you won't get a check for a while. If you've been getting paid quarterly, you probably won't get a check until that catches up, but then you'll get paid more frequently after that. So, there's some good news and bad news in there, depending on what your personal situation is.
Can I answer one of the questions in the portal? Sorry, about the IPI. So the IPI is assigned by your PRO. So when you affiliate with a PRO as a writer or a publisher, your PRO automatically assigns the IPI.
And that will be in your record. So if you look yourself up on ASCAP or BMI, or probably any of them, somewhere in your record that comes back, it will be an IPI number. So you can find out what it is.
And if possible, try not to confuse your PRO member number with your IPI. That's something that happens. And the problem with that is if you think that your member number is your IPI and then you start trying to register works using the member number, all of a sudden you could create an issue where you don't get paid.
Right.
So, Chris, let's shift gears and talk about advances and unmatched mechanical royalties. So can you quickly explain what is an advance and what is a recoupment?
Okay, so advances are, you usually get an advance if you sign to a publisher. Let's take the easy case, where you're getting an advance from a publisher. And that is a prepayment of royalties. So very often, particularly if you're an artist and you have a record deal and you've gone out and shopped a publishing deal, you'll have a publishing deal which either has a fixed advance per album or an advance that's based on performance of the past album or past two albums. And that will then get recouped by that publisher against future revenue. Which will be all revenue. And the way it works in publishing deals is usually you'll either have a co-publishing deal or you'll have an administration deal, just to keep it simple. Your co-publishing deal will typically be what they call a 50-50, 75-25 co-publishing split, just to make it exceptionally Freudian. So the reason why something can be both 50-50 and 75-25 is because the 50-50 refers to copyright ownership and the 75-25 refers to the revenue split. So the 25 goes to your publisher and the 75 goes to you. So when money comes in to the publishing deal, it goes 100% to recoup your advance. And then once your advance is recouped, then you go into the 75-25 split. On an admin deal, it could be 10, 15, 20%, depending on what it is. And there's international wrinkles on this. But the biggest difference for this conversation between mechanicals and other income streams, such as performances, especially performances, is in performances, it is rare for the writer share of performance revenue to be applied against unrecouped advances. So usually what happens is the entire publisher share goes to your publisher, and if you're unrecouped, then it gets applied on a recoupment basis. Mechanical royalties are 100% recoupable monies, right? So this is what's interesting about the MLC. If they're paying out mechanicals to the publisher, it's just going to go under your deal. It's not going to be like a PRO. So that's another big difference between the MLC and a PRO, is that you don't retain any ridership.
And can you explain to the audience what happens if a songwriter's or publisher's works are not properly registered with the MLC? So what happens in this sort of event?
Well, Abby can speak to that better than I can probably, but it's what I think would happen is it would be considered to be unmatched. And if you look at the regs and the statute, the word matched appears a lot, particularly involving payments, right? So do not blow past that word, okay? Because that word doesn't mean that you have gone through the laborious process of having your catalog cleaned up and all the services that have been paying you money for the last 20 years or whatever to this date. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that it's matched at your PRO because you put in the time to make sure that it is. What it means is it matched at the MLC? Right? It could have been matched at the service, and hopefully when it came over, it stayed matched, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's no guarantee that that's true. And what really matters is whether it's matched, however it got matched, whether it's matched at the MLC. Because if it isn't, then it goes into the dreaded black box.
Which by the way, sorry, I just got to say one thing. You're assuming that it's matched to the right party.
Well, yes, and then there's that.
So I just want to say that because I want you to talk about the black box, but before we get there, let's say it's matched to the wrong party,
right?
And that party is receiving your royalties. This is a whole other problem. So Chris is talking about right now when there's no identified party that's the entitled party. But we have this other problem, which is what about when it's matched to the wrong party? But sorry, please go on about the black box.
No. Well, but that's a very good point, because then it may never get caught. See, this is the other reason why you have to keep an eye. I mean, what I have always said about the MLC is that as soon as I get the first statement, I want to notice an audit. Right? I just want to go now. Let's just go now, right? Because why wait? What's the point of waiting? Go in there and find out, what's happening with your work, because that's probably the only way you're ever going to find out. But yeah, so when you get a statement, and if we seem to be laughing about this, it's not that it's funny. It's just that the whole situation is so Kafkaesque, that it's just, you have to laugh. Otherwise, it's just another miserable thing. But you first of all, in order to know that someone who isn't supposed to be getting your money is getting your money, because they're not going to raise their hand in all likelihood, you have to go track it down. And then it goes into dispute. And guess what they have not established yet at the MLC? Dispute resolution policies, right? As far as I know, anyway. And so then it has to get sorted, right? The other thing to keep in mind when you think about these things is one of the first rules in the regs about reporting is that there has to be at least a payment of 1 cent that's payable before any statement is triggered. And we laugh, but in the world of streaming, where people don't find a positive integer until you get 3, 4, 5 decimal places to the right, and where administrators negotiate over how many decimal places are going to be in their reporting, that's actually a thing, right?
Yeah.
So when you take that into consideration, that you may be scrapping over literally mills, what's, at what point is it cost effective for you to spend the time to go in and, start chasing people, right? But that's basically what it comes down to. So if it goes into the black box, they're going to hold that money. They're supposed to be engaging in continual matching efforts, which, let me be cynical and say, I wouldn't say no one believes, but I don't think many people believe that they're actually going to be doing that. But let's say they are, and then as they match, they're supposed to make an adjusting payment to you. And that's also true of the services, because one of the great giveaways that the services got in the MMA was that if they make matching efforts, and if they pay the black box inception to date on their service, which will be a date in the past that's going to vary from service to service because it's the inception of their service. If they pay over the black box to the MLC, which people think is going to be hundreds of millions of dollars at a minimum, then they get a limitation on liability, meaning like a safe harbor to where they can only be sued for unpaid royalties and not statutory damages or infringement, going back, at any time prior to. In other words, if you hadn't filed your lawsuit by January 1st, 2018, they basically get out of statutory damages as long as they comply with the other requirements and make these payments. Now, lately, there's been talk about this limitation on liability part being optional. Oh, I have the option, which, I suppose theoretically is true. But the black box is going to be the subject of a major Copyright Office study. And the MLC has said basically that they're going to wait until the Copyright Office study comes out as to what best practices are. And they've got this other report at the Copyright Office of what other collectives do around the world, which to me is sort of, it's interesting reading, but it doesn't really make any difference because all those collectives pay their own costs, right? So there's a cost-effective analysis. That means something different when it's your money or the songwriter's money ultimately that's being used to track people down, right? Then that's being used to track people down. To me, there should be no cost-effective analysis, cost-benefit analysis in this process for the MLC. But I'm sure that that's a minority view. But I really don't. If there is, it should be quite extreme, right? I mean, it should be quite extreme. So anyway, that's the black box. And then at the end of the day, if they get through there's a 3-year holding period, which will probably get extended for the first payment. At the end of that 3 years, if they don't have, whatever is unmatched at the end of that 3 years still will get paid out on a market share basis to the major publishers who comprise a supermajority vote of the board of the MLC, right? So that's what the black box is.
There's one thing I'd like to bring up, if I may.
Yeah.
We're focused on the MLC right now. We're focused on Harry Fox. But it's worth noting that there is no CMO in the world that has entirely clean data. Right. And everything that we're talking about here about searching public portals for your data, making sure works are correct, that applies everywhere, every single entity that pays you. The reason we're so focused on the MLC is because there's this promise that it's supposed to be this brand new database, this musical works database with clean data that's really well matched to the sound recordings. That's why it's new. And I think we have an opportunity as songwriters and publishers right now to maybe get our stuff cleaned. That's why this one's the focus right now. But do know that you should be looking everywhere.
And either Abby or Chris, feel free to answer this question. How do self-administered songwriters and music publishers discover if there are, in fact, unmatched mechanical royalties that are owed to them?
Abby, why don't you take that?
Sorry, I was just reading a question, and I want to. Abby mentioned that unrepresented co-songwriters need to each individually register and enter their info with the MLC. What happens if the co-writers enter conflicting information? So that's going to come back to the conflict resolution thing, that the lack thereof, the fact that we don't know yet. We don't know what's going to happen with conflict resolution and dispute resolution. Sorry, will you repeat the question, Gwen?
Yeah. How do self-administered songwriters and music publishers discover if there are, in fact, unmatched mechanical royalties that are owed to them?
So, not yet, but I think it's by the end of March. And I believe it's related to when the services deliver their usage reports reflecting the unmatched lines. Then the MLC is supposed to have some kind of a claiming portal where rights holders should be able to, where anyone actually, I'm not sure who can search through that claiming portal. I think it's rights holders will be able to. I don't know if right from the beginning, but the goal would be that you search for your song, and then there should be some kind of a link or something to play or audition at least part of the sound recording that embodies your song. So by listening to that sound recording, you can then say, yes, that is my song. And you can then say, claim. I don't know exactly how the MLC's version of this is going to work, but other claiming portals have worked like that, where, you type in the name of your song, a bunch of sound recordings or ISRCs might pop up. You then either have to listen to them via that portal, or you might have to go to, let's say, Spotify or someplace and look for the name of that recording.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to it. Yes, that's mine. Sometimes you claim a share. In other words, you're sort of almost registering your share as you're making that claim. I'm not really sure how this particular portal will function, but you can't do it yet.
Yeah. So I think that next it would be useful for the audience. I imagine that probably some of you have publishers or administrators that are doing this work for you, or maybe you've watched this or you've thought about it and you're like, I just want to engage someone to do this work for me. But there might be some of you out there who want to do this yourself. And so these next few slides, we're just going to kind of go through some screenshots from the MLC website to just kind of show you some of these steps to get hooked in. So I saw one of the questions in the chat was, what is the MLC website in order for someone to be able to register? This is the website here, portal.themlc.com/sign-up. And so you'll go here to begin the registration process. You'll click on the sign up button, at which point you will see this screen. It will ask you for some personal information like your name, address, date of birth, email address, phone number. And so once you've filled this out and click submit, you should receive a link via email pretty quickly that then will allow you to start creating your member profile with MLC. So once you click on that link, it will ask you to log in using the email address and the password that you've created for the MLC. And then this screen will come up and will ask you, which type of user are you? So Abby, would you mind just kind of going over what these various options mean?
Yeah, okay. So I work for a publishing company or CMO, or I am a completely self-administered songwriter. So let's just address the CMO thing because we haven't yet. Collective management organization, sort of the same thing as a PRO. So a PRO and an MRO, which is a mechanical rights organization, we often also just lump them together in this term, collective management organization, CMO. Many foreign CMOs are essentially the rights holder. They are sort of identified as the rights holder because when we affiliate directly with those societies, we actually assign them rights, exclusive rights in their territories. So that's why we're seeing CMOs here. Much of the foreign repertoire that's coming into the MLC is is coming from those CMOs. So are you a CMO? Are you a publishing company? or I'm a completely self-administered songwriter. I work. What's the difference between one and two? I'm sorry.
So it looks like for the second one, it means that you're collecting or administering on behalf of more than one publishing entity, whereas the first option
right.
here.
Right. So the first one is I'm the songwriter, and I own my copyrights. I'm the publisher. There is no other, and I don't administer anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
That's I think the main distinction of that first one. I publish my own works. I collect for myself. Period. That's it. That's the first one. The second one is somebody like me. I'm an administrator. I administer a lot of different publishers. So the way that kind of functions is that they set up sort of a parent ID. That's me. And then all of those publishers I administer are below mine, but associated with mine. So that's the distinction between those first two. The third one is I am a partially self-administered songwriter. So I think that's where you have some works that are published by somebody else or administered by somebody else. And then you have others that are not. So you are both administered and self-administered. The fourth one is you're a songwriter who has somebody else collecting for you entirely. And I'm not really sure why they have that there, because I don't know what the purpose is. But because you can't collect anything if somebody else is collecting for you. If I may, I just Helene had I thought Helene had a question about. The question was about if you were in a publishing deal. What if I was signed to a major publisher and the rights reverted to me, but the songs are still registered with that major in the MLC database? What do I do? Helene, that question made me think about this, because let's say that was the case. I would say that I'm either a partially self-administered songwriter or I'm the first option. And then that's going to kick some kind of conflict process, right? Because that major publisher is also going to be claiming the works that I'm ultimately going to be registering. Sorry.
So the cleanest way to solve that issue, I think, is to just go to the publisher from whom the songs reverted, and have them update it in the MLC database, because otherwise it'll go into dispute resolution, and God knows how long that will take to resolve.
Yeah.
So the quickest thing would be just go get them. I mean, these things take time. Reversions are a tricky process.
But typically, I would say we generally, when we exit a deal, we get a letter of direction or a termination acknowledgement or a settlement release or something, and then we, as the party that is entitled to the reverted rights, then we're the ones who deliver that to the society, because we're the one who has the interest. Generally, the one who's lost the rights isn't super motivated to do it.
Right. Yeah, assuming there was such a paper.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So a question just popped up here that I wanted to answer really quickly. This person says that I paid CD Baby Pro to be my administrator. So does that mean I'm not self-administered? So keep in mind with CD Baby, they have CD Baby distribution, then they have Pro Publishing. So if you have CD Baby Pro Publishing and all of your catalog you've delivered to CD Baby Pro Publishing, then at least according to the MLC, you're not what they consider to be a self-administered songwriter, because you have CD Baby Pro Publishing doing this work for you. Nevertheless, you still should go check in the public database and make sure that your works are registered properly. Just because, all these aggregators, they administer, millions and millions of works. And so when you're delivering data to different places, it's easy for there to be mistakes made here and there. So you just want to go and make sure that it's correct. So let me hide that. And then we'll go to the next slide. So once you choose one of those four options there, the next screen will ask you for, more contact information. It will ask you for your Harry Fox agency account number. You may not have that. And if you don't, you just leave that blank. It will also ask for your IPI number, which Abby explained earlier. You find that if you're registered with ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC, you should find that in your account. And then once you,
I'm sorry to cut you off, but this ASCAP and BMI you'll be able to see the IPI in the public portal. With CSAC, to see the IPI, you actually have to go into your personal portal because they do not show IPIs publicly.
Oh, okay. Thank you for providing that distinction. And so once you've filled out that information, you will receive this message, and it says that your member registration is processing, and they are going to be verifying your registration. And this process takes approximately 1 to 3 business days. With the person I work with, when we were just kind of testing this out, it took him about 1.5 days to get accepted into the system. So once you're in the system, now what? You want to begin down the process of registering your works. Now, Abby, it would be, I think, helpful for the audience for them to know, what kind of information they're going to need to have on hand when they begin to register.
Okay. Just really quickly, 10S City, I like the name. Yes, BMI and other PROs are going to cover performance, and MLC will cover mechanicals, and that leads to the answer here partly. It's related. I do not believe that the Mechanical Society, meaning MLC, I don't believe they would ever assign an ISWC. So the ISWC is the International Standard Work Code. That is that's assigned by your PRO. So the identifier that's sort of globally unique to that work is the ISW, globally unique and known is the ISWC. So first step to registering your work is register it at the PRO first. Once you've registered it with the new CSAC modernization of the ISWC program, that ISWC, provided all of the requirements are fulfilled, that ISWC should be assigned within about 24 hours. So once you've got the ISWC assigned, then come to the MLC, come to Harry Fox, go to MRI, whatever, and enter in the song title, the name of the song, and any alternate titles, by the way. So, for example, if it's called like The 100, you might spell out THE 100, but you might also want an alternate title that's the, and then the number 100. Or whatever, Unchained Melody has an alternate title, Are You Still Mine? Because the name of the song isn't in the lyric. The ISWC, as I said, get it from your PRO, then bring it over to MLC. While MLC, Harry Fox, they are assigning their own identifier. It is really important because the ISWC is globally used. The Harry Fox MLC thing is solely used by them. So we want to make sure that their identifier is associated with that ISWC. That gives you your best shot of getting paid. Income sharing data means like the share of the work. So yes, there's only a copyright, but there's joint owners of the copyright. Let's say if you have co-writers. So what is your share of, what's your collection share or your owner? We call it an own share. How much are you entitled to of 100%? So if there's 3 songwriters and they're dividing it equal, it would be 33, 33, 33, or a third. Info related to commercially released recordings of your songs. So this is the really big deal with the mechanical societies. What we're really trying to get them to do is say, here's a song, an ISWC, and it's been recorded, is embedded in this sound recording. This sound recording has a title, which may not be the same as the song title. And fortunately, in almost all cases, this sound recording has what's called an ISRC, the International Standard Recording Code. Our best case scenario in terms of collecting our money is knowing the ISRC and having that data be universally shared among all the services and have that ISRC be delivered comprehensively accurately to the MLC, and having the MLC know that this ISWC, this song title, is associated with this ISRC. So when we see that there are 1 million streams of this ISRC, we know that we have to pay the rights holders of this ISWC. So as much information as you can provide when you're registering, the more likely you are to collect your money. Okay, co-writers. If each co-writer has retained their right to control their interest of a song, yes, each writer, each party that owns part of the copyright must register, must give their information. And I'm just going to say it again, make sure you give your banking information because it's not automatically populating there. So make sure that you go into your portal and give them the banking information because as Michelle Schacht is pointing out, April 15th is kind of far away and we're going to need that money when it does start to flow.
Exactly. So I also thought it would be useful for people to see what the homepage layout looks like. You can see total works, registrations in process, drafts. And then here on the left-hand side, it gives you some options, including register individual work or register bulk works. And Abby, I posed this question to you yesterday because out of curiosity, I clicked on register bulk works. And, it seemed like kind of a complicated, more sophisticated process. So can you explain when someone would use this option? Because it seems like to me that, a self-administered songwriter would just go to register individual work probably, right?
So I haven't gone in yet. I haven't clicked on the register bulk works, but what I know from the discussions we had before this whole thing happened was the format. So Harry Fox currently has what they call their e-song format for bulk registrations of work. Who needs to bulk register? Well, like if you're a production music library and you release commercially, meaning you're not only receiving money from film and TV, which would not be processed via the MLC, but let's say you have all of your works on Spotify and you have to register 10,000 works, you're probably not going to want to go in there one by one.
Yeah.
That's the user who needs this bulk registration option. But if you have 35 or you have 50, you could do it. You could reasonably register them one by one within the portal. And by the way, anybody who's an affiliate of a PRO and has ever registered to work at a PRO has to understand at least the basic works registration concepts, and those will sort of be pretty much the same here. There was one question. I'm sorry to segue. I think this is important.
Go for it.
The question is YouTube a DMP? So I just want to bring up, Chris. I do want to bring up that the art tracks now, the YouTube art tracks will be licensed and distributed by the MLC, but the ad revenue, which is essentially a sync, or the subscription revenue that's essentially a sync, that does not flow through the MLC. Chris, I know, I can tell.
Well, there's a serious question as to whether art tracks actually are mechanical that is within the ambit of the MLC. And this is starting to happen. So let's talk for a minute about that. So the MLC is only supposed to administer reproduction and distribution. In other words, mechanical rights, hence the name, right? They are also able to administer voluntary licenses, but there are limitations on those as well. What we've seen just in the last month or so, a couple months anyway, that Apple is transferring all their mechanical licensing over to the MLC. They've sent out a notice and they terminated their deal for lyrics and basically iTunes Match, right? Mm-hmm. They sent out termination notices. So I'm mystified as to how the MLC can license lyrics, and the MLC doesn't claim to be able to license lyrics either, by the way, but somehow that's getting done. So what I suspect is that given the amount of effort that's being put into improving the Harry Fox Agency database, it wouldn't shock me if we find that which can be licensed by the MLC is being licensed by the MLC, and that which the services would like to license in addition to those rights is being licensed by the Harry Fox Agency. We'll see, time will tell, but it wouldn't shock me if that were happening. But these art tracks, I don't know where they get off with this, because the art tracks have always been, as far as I know, have always been licensed under voluntary agreements, not through statutory, and the MLC can only administer statutory. and limited voluntary agreements. So, it's just, I think what's going to end up happening is that these services are going to say, well, hey, we're paying for this, so we're going to put it all over there, and then sort it out later.
So sorry. Thanks for all that, because I feel like the YouTube thing is really, really important and definitely a big question. Coming back to the bulk works, so I do want to say that in the eSong format, my experience with eSong has been that you solely deliver your share, and that's probably, I don't know. I suspect if you're delivering in the bulk song format via the MLC, which I've not seen yet, I suspect you might be solely delivering your own data, not that of your co-writers or co-publishers.
Okay, so let's go back to this screenshot here. And let's say that you want to go ahead and register an individual work. You would click here, at which point this would come up. And so with the MLC, you must search for your work before you can move ahead with registering it. So you would put in your work title and your writer name. And so if there is no match in their system, it will show you that there was no work found with this title. Maybe if there's an alternate title, maybe you try that and just make sure that it's not already in the system. But let's just say that there is no match, at which point you would go down here and click on create new work, at which point you would then deliver a lot of that data, that information that Abby talked about earlier. The title, writer information, publisher information, IPI number, etc. Now, I wanted to bring up that if people have questions about the MLC when they're trying to go ahead and register, you can either go here to essentially send the MLC an email, or you can call this phone number. Now, I believe in giving credit where credit is due. And I have called the MLC a total of 3 times within the past, I guess, week or so. And each time I've gotten a person on the line within 3 to 4 minutes, which is pretty much unheard of. Like, I've called PROs before and been on hold for like 45 minutes before being able to get to someone. So at least for right now, I would just say that if you have questions, I would go ahead and try calling and just seeing if you can get a hold of someone there.
My experience also was really positive when I had to call to get something set up, because not only was it quick, but the woman I spoke with was pretty savvy, which I thought was great considering they were all brand new.
I would also point out that the Copyright Office retains regulatory oversight over the MLC. And so in case things are not going swimmingly, you can complain to the Copyright Office. And this is important because the MLC gets redesignated every 5 years. And if there's no record, they'll open it for public comments probably the year that they're going to redesignate, which will be 2024, I think, if I remember right. But Copyright Office would be interested, I'm sure, in hearing about any problems. I mean, you want to be judicious with that. You don't want to, just say, well, I'm on hold, they haven't answered yet, or something. But if you have a real breakdown where you have something which you think is, a systemic flaw, you should contact the Copyright Office. And you do that by going to copyright.gov. And if you look up in the nav bar, there's a button for contact on the landing page. And then just use the drop down other, and you have a web form to make your comment.
One more thing, and we're just going to kind of breeze through this. I think it's really important for songwriters to actually understand mechanical royalties that are derived from streaming. First of all, I don't consider there to be a set mechanical royalty rate per stream, because this rate changes each month. And the rate depends upon the revenue that the particular digital music provider like Spotify generates over a month period of time, and the version of the platform that's being used. So I think let's look at this in terms of an example. In June of 2019, the mechanical royalty rate on Spotify for that month period of time for the standalone portable mixed use version, which is like the version you use on your phone, was 0.000528 cents. Now, if you really want to do the math here, which I've already done, that means that it takes 189,377 streams during that month period of June of 2019 to generate $100 in mechanical royalties. And it's even worse if we're talking about the free or ad-supported version of a platform like Spotify. And in that event, it was 0.000312 cents, meaning that it would take 320,232 streams during this period of June of 2019 to generate $100 in mechanical royalties. Now you might be thinking, well, that was June of 2019. That was a long time ago. I would wager that this has gotten even worse. I would have to go back through and calculate, but Chris or Abby, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But over time, it seems like these rates have kind of gone lower and lower. So we're talking about fractions of pennies. And I think it's fun to think about things comparing streaming and physical product sales. So if you want to do some more math, a songwriter would only have to sell 110 albums with 10 of her own tracks on the album to generate $100 in mechanical royalties, because the mechanical royalty rate, and that's why I'm not using it in quotes, because it's an actual rate that's fixed, over time, is 9.1 cents per song per record sold. So yes, this is bullshit, but this is how it works. So now let's look at some questions. I found this question from Jeffrey, which I think, Chris, you could probably answer. Which, and we were kind of talking about this earlier, right? If I update the MLC database, will the HFA database be updated accordingly?
Well, first of all, there's no guarantee that will happen. But if you acknowledge that the MLC database is the HFA database, and that you really connect to the HFA database through an API, and so there is no MLC database, then you're not really updating the MLC database, you're updating the HFA database. So in theory, the HFA database should be updated if you update the MLC database, because there is no MLC database. It's only the HFA database that you access through an API. And I can give you my Lewis Carroll bibliography if you'd like to read up on all that stuff. Just kidding. Just kidding.
I'm looking through these questions here to see which ones we've answered or not.
Can I answer another one from Helene, which I had said that this problem is not specific to MLC, that it's everywhere. And Helene's question was, how do I look if I'm not an affiliate of the society? Which is a fantastic question, and clearly the big bottleneck here. In general, if you're not an affiliate of a society, it's more difficult to search, but many do have public-facing portals. So any society that does have a public-facing portal that allows you to search, I highly recommend that you do it. And that would include like SACEM, I believe SOCAN has a public portal. I mean, there's I think some of the Nordic societies do. So as many societies as you can query, you will benefit from knowing what your data looks like.
I would add to that, it has come out in the process of negotiating these MLC regulations that the services acknowledge that on occasion they actually change song titles to suit their user, what they perceive as their user preferences. This is insane, of course, right? But they, sorry?
It's a fantastic point you're making.
Yeah, but they do it. So if you've had that experience of, hey, I got all my data together, it's all nice and clean, and then you give it to to the distributor, and then or the publisher, and it comes back and it's totally screwed up. One of the reasons is because they actually change it. Another thing you might want to do is one of the, which we didn't talk about really, but one of the precursors to this whole MMA process was the address unknown debacle, where services were taking advantage of a loophole in the Copyright Act that said if you can't locate the songwriter or the publisher, copyright owner, in the public records of the Copyright Office, that you can send a notice to the Copyright Office saying, I can't find this person, and then you get all the benefits of the license without having to pay a royalty until the person becomes identifiable in the public records of the Copyright Office, setting aside the fact the only thing that's really in the public records of the Copyright Office that's particularly relevant to this is copyright registrations, which you're not required to make. So you will find things like, I looked up Sting because I'm familiar with that catalog, and they said that they couldn't find the copyright owner for Sting Fragile Live. Well, there is no song called Sting Fragile Live. There's a song called Fragile, but there's not a song called Sting Fragile Live, and you can look as long as you want, and you're never going to find it because it's not there. And Sound Exchange, through its SX Works affiliate, created a database of these works, which are important for this question because these titles all came from the services themselves, saying that they could not find these songs. And you can go to this SX Works database, which has about 60 million songs in it, because this was on steroids that they did this, right? But you can go to this database and search there and see if you're there, because that may be interesting too, particularly if it's a language other than English, right? You might find yourself there.
So to that end, I just want to say that I mentioned the concept of an alternate title. That is one of the things we do. Whenever one of our songs is released by an artist who changes, let's say the title becomes title featuring so-and-so. We will add those featuring so-and-so as an alt title every time we see it. The idea is just to make sure that as much as you can, you're facilitating that association being made.
Right.
So hold on. I see here that India Taylor Music said that she did not get the entire website address written down. So let me go back. I'm not sure if you were talking about this one, but here it is right up here. Note that this will be available and up on the Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts YouTube page, so people can go back and watch this if they want to review some of the information here. Or I'm not sure if this was the particular website address you were referring to, but here it is. Okay. So it looks like we've answered a lot of these questions, and we're now hitting the hour-and-a-half mark. I know that we were initially thinking about just having this be an hour, but the problem is, I mean, this is a really complicated area, right? And there's a lot of information, and this is, a lot of this is new. And so thank you to the 42 people who are still here with us watching. And thank you so much, Chris and Abby, for joining us. And thank you to Austin, Texas musicians and to the Austin Music Foundation for partnering with Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts for this event, and for all of the awesome marketing and promoting work that y'all did for this. You can find at the bottom of the screen, there are some scrollers happening that give links to the Austin Music Foundation's website, along with Austin, Texas Musicians website, and a website for to find out more about Abby and Chris as well.
One question that was asked was, does anybody recommend a resource for how to copyright your songs properly? I want to give a plug to a company called Cosigned, COSYND. My experience with them has been fantastic in terms of getting copyrights registered, and their knowledge of their ability to sort of navigate that Copyright Office is stellar.
I would just add two quick things. One, if you haven't done so already, please fill out the survey. And there's a link to the survey on the Eventbrite page. And we're going to keep that open until the end of the month. But if you haven't already, please fill it out because we will use that data. And then the other thing is that I have a post up on music tech policy, which I thought I had shared in the chat, but apparently I'm not able to do that. It's about how to get paid, what to expect on getting paid by the MLC, and that is just musictechpolicy.com. And
I'm posting that in the chat right now.
Okay, it's the first post up there right now. And I also posted the a link to the Harry Fox Agency royalty rate charts, which are pretty useful in terms of understanding streaming mechanicals.
And Chase, yes, co-signed, COSYND. I really do recommend them.
So without further ado, I think that this is the end of the presentation. And thank you all so much for all of the valuable information that you have shared to this audience today. So have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks so much for including me.
Thanks a lot, folks.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.